Yeah, so I'm Matthew Farrell. I'm the digital records archivist at Duke, and I'm speaking very briefly this morning on work that I'm currently involved with Alex Chasanoff here at SILS to develop a content model for disk images for Fedora repositories. Nothing out of the ordinary with the structure of this. So at Duke, we create disk images for almost all media that we acquire, but we provide access almost exclusively to extracted files or otherwise normalized or derived files from those disk images. We have a Fedora-based or a Hydra framework Fedora repository. We don't currently manage our born digital assets in that repository. We will be offering access copies in that repository, but in some cases, probably with personal papers, particularly our electronic literature collections, we would also want to store the original disk images as a preservation object and then make that link between the derived files and the disk image more explicit. We'd also like to be able to serve metadata specific to disk image files. This ranges from log files about the disk image creation process, so if someone is looking at a disk image and notices that files might be fragmented or otherwise incomplete, it'd be helpful to know that during the creation of that disk image, bad sectors were found. Similarly, we can be able to serve up metadata related to the file system of the disk image, even down to the object level, some of that object level metadata that is derived, and then we could apply that or link it to kind of the extracted files that we're also offering access to. And then finally, in some limited cases, offering direct access to disk image files, assuming that there is no restricted content and assuming that the user has the appropriate privileges and permissions. So the inspiration come from internal and external conversations with folks, previous work at Emory University to develop a content model, I think specifically for AFF and ISO image files, and then also the relatively mature state of our Fedora repository. As I mentioned, we don't currently manage the born digital resources, and so this seems like kind of a right time to do this work on my side. So current work in this area is to develop with the C model, SDEF, and SDEP objects for a Fedora 3 repository. I'll speak in just a moment as to why it chose Fedora 3 as opposed to Fedora 4. The main goal is to keep it generic-ish for a couple of reasons. One, would like to keep it institution agnostic, so we can develop this model, put it up online, and then other institutions can adopt it with as little tweaking as possible. But more importantly, there's a large variety both of the content files that we'll be dealing with. I think in our holdings now we have at least 4 and possibly 5 disk image file formats. That is the result of changes in practice over time, changes in industry standards over time. But then also a wide variety in the types of metadata that is available to disk images. While it would be great if we had robust DFXML reports for every disk image in our collection, again, changes in practice over time, as well as file system incompatibilities and other types of problems make that impossible. So this is just, I guess the title didn't translate. This is just a diagram of the proposed kind of collection overview. On the left there is the disk image resource object with associated content and resource metadata streams. On the right would be kind of the extracted files and their metadata streams. The relationship between DFXML is maybe a pie in the sky desire to be able to link that the DFXML data to the metadata from the extracted files. This is a slightly different view of similar data. These are the content data streams that I'm planning on implementing with this. As you can see, the only required content data stream would be the disk image file itself, and we're hoping to have support for at least those 5 file formats. The disk image creation log, while that is could also be considered metadata, in this context I've included it with content data stream, if only because it's usually a simple text file. It's not in a standardized format depending on the application you use to create the disk image, so it's unclear how we could map that to standardized XML formats. It would also be useful to, if available, bundle the bulk extractor and/or annotated feature outputs into an archive file and include that with the content data streams as well. The next slide here is the metadata data streams. The only required data stream that I'm thinking of is the standardized or the standard stub record elements required by the Fedora content model, or the Fedora object model rather. Of course, additional descriptive metadata is always encouraged, but again, whether that is available or not is an open question. And then again, the kind of the pie in the sky goal is to be able to include digital forensics XML when available as a metadata stream as well. It's an open question whether this will be crosswalked into something like Dublin Core, or whether we can add support in the repository for DFXML as a standard that is indexable and searchable. So challenges. I mentioned a moment ago that I'm developing this for Fedora 3. Fedora is kind of at an interesting point right now. Fedora 4.0, I think, came out a month and a half ago. The object model has changed somewhat. The documentation for that object model and the changes are not as robust or clear as I would like them to be at the moment. It's also unclear when locally when we will upgrade to Fedora 4. It's kind of on our agenda to do it soon. But as far as I know, the Fedora folks are not including upgrade resources until Fedora 4.1, which is the next release cycle. And then there's always policy decisions, for instance, who decides when to preserve both the disk image and the extracted contents. Right now, those decisions are handled mostly by me, and so I'm keeping them in all cases. And that's fine as far as it goes, because we don't have storage concerns at the moment, but that is never that's not going to be the case forever. So bringing in the appropriate people, both on the curatorial side as well as on the IT side, to make those decisions is something we still have to figure out. And so finally, next steps. So I need to finish explicating the objects that I discussed above, solicit feedback both internally and externally from the community. So putting them up online, finding people that want to actually give me feedback on that, sell it to our repository developers internally at Duke, and then when we decide to upgrade to Fedora 4, then map this to the Fedora 4 object model as well. That's all I have.
Thank you.